Welcome to this episode of The World According to Irina Tsukerman, our very own special series on global politics on the KJ Masterclass Live. Irina Tsukerman is a US based national security and human rights lawyer, as well as a renowned geopolitical analyst. Her writings and commentary have appeared in diverse US and international media and have been translated to over a dozen languages. Every fortnight in The World According to Irina Tsukerman, we traverse the geopolitical landscape and delve into pressing international issues and gain insight from Irina's expert perspective. Welcome to the show once again, Irina.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. And several big topics again today. Every fortnight, we come with some of the big topics. And let's take on the first big topic, Trump's tariffs. Liberation Day tariffs, as they call it. So, what should we make out? Where are we on this? It's already roiled the markets. People are fearing even worse. Where do we stand? Where does America stand? Where does the world stand? Where does India stand? Where does China stand? Where does Europe stand? Everyone is trying to find their footing on this. Help us understand this particular thing called Liberation Day tariffs. Trump's Liberation Day tariffs.
Well, Liberation Day, I think some people are joking that it liberated their pension accounts from money. so, so in that sense, it may be a very apt name for this policy. But I'll start with a observation, which I don't know whether to laugh or to cry, but there is a good possibility that ChatGPT may have written these taxes and these tariffs, the policy. So, given the quality of the general ChatGPT output, you get what you pay for. The other funny part about it is that it may be based on a mathematical error. I don't know whether the error comes from the ChatGPT part or from a misapplication of an adjusted formula, but essentially it penalizes poorer countries disproportionately, and the countries with trade surplus actually end up getting smaller burdens. So the result has been disastrous. Russia and a few of its allies escaped unscathed. On the other hand, countries like Israel that are in the middle of the war got slapped with a 17% tax, higher than Iran and Turkey and other problematic actors. China has gotten a 34% tax, which of course China is not going to be the one paying. It's going to be US businesses that deal with China, and some of them have already started going out of business even before the tariffs were fully applied. And by the way, the 34% has turned into something that could be closer to 104% at the end, because Trump threatened additional 50% retaliation, and then some other tariffs. I don't know where they came from and when they were announced, but that seems to be the ultimate result. China has not been silent in that respect. It has used several strategies in response. The first, it actually essentially announced a 34% retaliatory tariff that happened on April 4th. And they are also scheduled to take effect on April 10th. And they are not generic exports. They are actually aimed at politically sensitive sectors such as agriculture and manufacturing that form the center of Trump's electoral base. The second thing that Beijing did was launch a formal complaint at the WTO, claiming that they're an injured party defending global free trade, which in itself is laughable, but nevertheless, that's what they did. And the third thing, and this is important, they actually suspended imports from 4 U.S. companies, including poultry and sorghum producers, especially Monterey Farms, which is a top Republican donor, was among those targeted. It's not a coincidence. the CEO of the company was an economic advisor in Trump's during Trump's first term, and he contributed a huge amount of money to the Republican campaigns for many years. So China is targeting companies linked to Trump-aligned donors and trying to stir internal dissent in the ranks, which is already happening. Elon Musk came out publicly questioning this policy and defending free trade, and there are rumored tensions between him and Trump over other issues as well. So China has been exploiting the situation. India likewise has been already negotiating trade relief even before all of this applied, starting with Prime Minister Modi's visit to the US. None of that has been fully resolved as of yet, as far as I see, unless something radically changes in the next few days. The tariff policy that Trump imposed will go into place as intended, and whether or not India will choose to retaliate with additional tariffs on top of the ones that are already in place, generally speaking. If that happens, it has not been publicly announced yet, but what we do know is that the administration has been negotiating with over 70 countries that have reportedly approached it requesting relief. Some countries have threatened retaliation but have not imposed it yet, with the hope of avoiding a trade war. Australia, which had no tariffs against US goods to begin with, said that it would not be retaliating, even though these tariffs are entirely one-sided. So it is, and Australia is trying to avoid damaging its own businesses in the process. So we are seeing a wide range of reactions, but what raises a major question is why none of this was predictable before the tariffs were imposed. How come the Trump administration did not use either its intelligence agencies or private firms, if it doesn't trust the intelligence agencies, to gather due diligence on the likely reaction of the world community, of countries like China, India, and so forth? Why is everyone being caught by surprise by the responses? None of it should have been surprised, and the policy should have been formulated taking into account the likely insider plans of these governments. So this is the fact that this policy has been, regardless of its intent, shot from the hip, so to speak, is in itself a hugely negligent and reckless way of governing, in my opinion.
Right. So even if we try to understand some rationale from a country like the U.S., irrespective of who is in the president's seat, how does it look like? Does it look like to be reciprocal? Does it look like to be beneficial to the U.S. or even anyone of its allies? Does it look like really about Liberation Day, or is it purely vindictive and harmful? Means there must be some rationale within which is going to help the United States of America. How do you see it from these angles, Irina?
Well, Trump has been selling this policy as reciprocal to his political base, but the truth is it isn't really. It isn't substantively in terms of the formula. So unless that changes, you cannot consider them retaliatory tariffs, because in fact they are not. Even if they were meant to be, in practice they're not. But I don't actually believe they were meant to be retaliatory either, simply based on Trump's own rhetoric and reactions. For instance, the European Union proposed a 0 for 0, essentially a free trade deal, which would have been a huge diplomatic win for everyone involved, and that's something I've been recommending for everybody, including for India. I thought that would have been a great way to move the relations forward, to open more businesses and to basically increase more opportunities for everybody to exchange the goods, that they're best at producing at lower costs, and allow everyone's economy to grow. But Trump sees everything as a zero-sum game, and instead he rejected the 0 for 0 deal, and actually instead threatened not to remove these tariffs until and unless the European Union buys $350 billion of US energy in reparation for the past, essentially accusing them for ripping US off with these past tariffs. Now, US is already one of the top producers of oil and gas that for exports to European Union, among other places. And chances are Europe would have been buying that energy regardless, but now that they are threatened with it, they could be going to other countries like Qatar and or to the Gulf states instead of dealing with the US just simply out of spite. So this could essentially backfire on the United States. Another issue is Israel. Now, some people have claimed that the Israel tariff imposition was a simple mistake. But if it's a mistake, it could have been lifted the next day. Israel lifted theirs right before, and they were very low to begin with, right before the official policy. The policy came in, they realized something is wrong, they should have removed it. However, they did not, and there were days of negotiations between Netanyahu's visit, which also did not yield any results, and Netanyahu's visit also did not yield any results. And even after the visit, when asked about it, Trump remained non-committal. So it is obvious that whatever the case may be, in public, behind the scenes, the US is trying to get additional and unrelated concessions from Israel. I have no idea what they could be, but it's clearly not something that Israel can afford to give up easily, otherwise it would have already happened. Israel is keen in avoiding angering Trump. They have been outwardly extremely collegial and differential. So clearly, whatever Trump is asking is not being perceived as anything remotely actionable or reasonable at the moment. So that whole situation also indicates that, at least in some cases, this situation is a political power play and not merely an economic measure to encourage domestic industrialization or to fix the trade imbalances.
Absolutely, Irina. So where do we go from here? Where do countries go from here? And do you think this will lead to more pressure on Trump in domestically, because business will get impacted? People also are watching things, and things are happening too fast. And is it also related? Maybe this hawkish stance is more related to, if I read it correctly, that Trump wants to change the US Constitution in that form that he can run for the third time for the US president. Do you think that is his agenda at the moment?
I don't think that's plausible, because, to be honest, that's extremely difficult to accomplish even under the best of circumstances, and it's only happened once for a reason. So I don't think that's doable, especially with the already busy agenda that Trump has on his plate. Regarding everything else, unless Trump changes that policy, Republicans will have a huge sweeping loss in the midterms, which are coming just already next year, and they will for sure lose the White House in 2028 to whoever is running at the time. We are seeing that there are talks that the Treasury Secretary could be leaving the administration after just 2 months, after less than 2 months after his confirmation, which indicates that he has strategic concerns about his own businesses being affected. Elon Musk, who might be leaving Doge sometime in May, is also expressing concerns, and there are many other Republicans speaking out, including voices in Congress finally waking up and responding aggressively. Several senators, including Senator Cruz and Grassley from the Republican Party, Congressman Don Bacon from the House, have all been very active in criticizing these measures and calling for changes or removal of these policies. And of course, while the market is benefiting the buyers, not everybody is in a position to buy, and nobody knows when the prices will stop crashing, especially if the tariff policy is not changed quickly. It will surely continue as businesses lose their ability to do what they need to do, and layoffs increase, and they've already started, by the way, with the, as I said, with the tariffs not yet being in place in some of the major cases. They have already started in preparation. So we are seeing a potential major economic crash in the United States, regardless of Trump's actual intentions. And I don't think the industry is coming back for many practical reasons. I have spoken to several people and asked them, what would make the policy worth it? How many jobs at what salaries would need to come back to compensate for the trillions dollars in uh, existing losses that have already been wiped out of the global economy? Nobody has yet to come up with any specific numbers, simply because they're impossible to calculate, and simply because if you start to think about it, nothing would compensate, because the jobs that would need to come back would be low-paying jobs for trinkets that are produced cheaply elsewhere, and that most Americans would not be willing to undertake, and the costs of resurrecting these industries would be higher and would raise the inflation significantly to wipe out any potential advantage of job creation. So nobody has been able to actually give a practical answer, and Trump himself has neither a definition of success nor a definition of a failure. What would it mean that his policies have not succeeded?
Absolutely. And how do you see this part? Firing NSA chief, staffers, just at some sort of a saying by some so-called conspiracy theories, allegedly by that means. Do you take political actions just by on the base of some theory by someone else?
Well, if you're referring to the Peter Navarro situation, where it was found that he literally made up a fictional character to justify his preposterous policies that got him an entry into Trump's White House in the first term, uh, this seems to me, on the one hand, almost unbelievable, but on the other hand, somewhat typical of the chaotic, irresponsible, and extremely emotional approach by the Trump administration in general to very serious matters. We are seeing Trump double down on the Gaza relocation plan despite the massive pushback it received from the Arab world, from many Americans, even international institutions, and the fact that the war is still ongoing, and speaking about reconstructions, relocations, and resettlements is premature, to say the least. So we are seeing this really emotional embrace of highly unlikely things that are emotionally satisfying on some level, vengeful tariffs that keep the world put at heel, resettlements of Gaza, and rebuilding it with Trump's businesses. All of that seems like a way to virtue signal to Trump's base, but in practice, none of these policies actually can work the way Trump actually claims. So the fact that he goes to really peripheral characters to give him advice on main issues is very characteristic. He found a vaccine denier, RFK Jr. for the position of the health secretary. He was ultimately forced to change his position on measles vaccine after 2 children died. But that hasn't stopped many other parents from buying into the nonsense and continuing the same course of action on this and other vaccinations.
Absolutely. Let's understand about his special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. It means what's happening there in terms of let's see in terms of Ukraine, in terms of Middle East. Where are we on these two things? We thought at least some sort of a breakthrough will happen, at least in Ukraine. There will be much more peace in the Middle East. How should we understand here? Trump complains about Putin, puts pressure on Zelensky, and then Russia continues with its airstrikes on Ukraine. How do we do? Are we reaching anywhere, or we are reaching nowhere?
Oh, we're going backwards. I would say we're not just not reaching anywhere. We are actually saving Russia from its own stupidity and its own mistakes and miscalculations. That's why Russia seems willing to play along as much as it does, even though it has actually not offered any meaningful concessions whatsoever, and in fact treated Trump with extreme level of disrespect. But Witkov is ideal for this scenario because Witkov combines two extremely damaging characteristics, each on its own, but in a combination they're even more so, which is complete lack of geopolitical experience and expertise, and dependency and conflicts of interest uh, caused by his business background. He's got business associations in Russia, and he was also bailed out by Qatar and remains completely dependent on his business with Qatar. His son is in business with Qatar, and that country essentially defines his worldview on everything related to the Middle East. And his approach is that of a real estate dealer, just like Trump, and not someone who is trying to unravel two exceptionally complicated and deeply historically rooted conflicts. Um, so it is no wonder that nothing has been worked out, and now Witkov is slated to lead the direct or indirect negotiations with Iran, where he too is surely likely to cause a major mess. Witkov infamously went on Tucker Carlson praising Doha, which Shin Bet, the Israeli Internal Security Services, is investigating for funding Hamas. And he also praised Hamas and then claimed to have been duped by them, uh, over claiming that they want a new ceasefire. And he was also apparently duped by Russia not once but twice. He went there at the time the signal leaks scandal was the signal leaks happened. He claims to not have had any phones with him whatsoever, but I find it very hard to believe. Why would he would surely have some device for communications, because he was in fact communicating with the group. What was he on if he did not have a device, either a laptop or a cell phone? Either is equally prone to hacking under those circumstances. And he also claimed that Putin was praying for Trump, and he basically gave Putin's line on everything upon return and had no weapons. He was not prepared to push back in any way. He just fell for every propaganda that came out of the Kremlin. This is someone completely unprepared for dealing with intelligence sharks like Putin and his crew. It's unbelievable. He's got conflicts of interest related to Dmitriev. He was actually doing deals with the Russian negotiating team in Washington as the tariffs were being imposed, and Russia was not one of those countries. Not only was he doing economic deals, but the same day sanctions on a Russian oligarch's wife were lifted. The significance of that wife is that Russian oligarchs, of course, write off their property in the names of their spouses and other family members to avoid confiscations and scrutiny and sanctions.
Absolutely. All the president's men seem to be working hard to get the president's job done. President's number two, once controversial visit leads to Greenland, it has led to increased tension with Denmark. Means, was that the need? Is that the topmost thing at the mind? And Heck said he is in Panama to try and get Trump the canal, Panama Canal. Means, again, is that the need of the hour, or some more consolidation before all these things should come up? Are these worth it? What is happening on these two fronts, Irina?
Look, in both cases, they come as chess pieces in the great power competition, and there are reasons for concern. Greenland is situated strategically near very important entries to the Arctic, where Russia and China are aggressively competing with Western countries for resources, access to strategic waterways, and so forth. Greenland is filled with minerals, which would be helpful in the race in the mineral rare earth race with China. Of course, they were nearly impossible to extract previously, but now with the changing climate conditions, they may be more easy to get to. And arguably, Denmark has mismanaged some of these affairs, at least somewhat, but has now been waking up and taking stronger security measures. None of that, however, is dispositive of what Trump is trying to achieve. First, because US has minerals of its own that don't need to be extracted from anywhere, and nothing needs to be conquered. But Trump fired the team in charge of oversight of that effort, of the mining effort. So why? So his actions actually mirror Biden's, who infamously shut down some of the oil trade with Canada and some of the domestic oil and gas extraction, and try to get some of these things from Saudi Arabia and from whoever else. That was ridiculous, and we're seeing the same effort. Biden's case, he went around begging for resources. Trump is threatening for resources, but the policy, the approach is essentially the same. That's the irony of the whole thing. And in neither case it's going to work, because unless US is actually ready to start a military incursion into Denmark in the middle of its all the other crises going on, I don't really see anybody agreeing to that. And the more J.D. Vance claims that Trump wants these things and everyone is obligated to give it to him, the more the locals in Greenland are turned off by the US, and even with the payoff, would unlikely to be to want to join the US in any way. All of these things could have been accomplished through normal diplomacy and coordination with Denmark, Greenland, and the European Union. Now it's turning against the US, and Panama may end up in the same position. The Panamanian government has already rejected some of the approaches by the Trump administration in terms of returning the canal back. China has just blocked BlackRock's attempts to acquire the local port. So we are seeing that China is actually waking up and becoming even more aggressive in that area than before Trump's approaches. And again, all of that could have been accomplished far better without angering the local government, causing a wave of local populism, and getting China involved beyond what it already has been.
Right, right, Irina. One thing I want to understand for the audience is, why is the Trump administration in such a great hurry about these rare earths? Either it's Ukraine, either it's Greenland. Means, does it look like Elon Musk has requested him for this so that you can use all these things to take his rockets faster to Mars or more or to more places? Why does it? Why you can wait, get onto the right diplomacy, and get things done just like other countries do?
Well, the truth is, as I said, if there was such a rush, it could have already been done by simply going to the existing US resources. That would be the fastest way of all. Because the resources in Greenland or in Ukraine still need to be extracted. In fact, in Ukraine, they still need to be cohesively identified. And Ukraine is a conflict zone. So even identifying those minerals would probably take at least 10 to 15 years, which is long past Trump's due date at the White House anyway. So, and by that point, we could be in an entirely different situation, and who knows what else would be happening. So these are allegedly urgent moves to satisfy the great power competition are actually this is what people don't realize. Even if Trump secured those resources today with full cooperation from all these countries, they would not be viable until many years from now. So they're essentially useless in terms of the immediate competitive needs against China or for Mars or whatever else that the administration wants to accomplish now. So all of it is entirely to secure Trump's legacy and to make basically a diplomatic point and secure bragging rights, but not because it would actually benefit the US in the immediate short term. It would not. That's just to make things clear. And in fact, the tariffs, have simultaneously backfired in the sense that China, as one of its measures, actually blocked a whole group of rare earth minerals from export to foreign countries. So then that has actually made the situation even worse for the US from that perspective.
Absolutely. Rare earths, as of today, even if extracted today, are useless for today, maybe tomorrow. But what is useful today is to tackle this signal leaks scandal. What's happening in that? How is the Trump administration looking at it? How should we understand? A lot of people know about it. So many people do not know about it. How do you like to tell them where we are on this signal leak scandal?
Well, it's one of the stupidest scandals of this administration so far because it's based in nothing but recklessness and just very poor security measures and nothing else. Now, turns out that the group of top US national security officials were using unsecured means for their communication. Signal is a secured app. It's perfectly fine for people like you and me. It's actually hard to penetrate. It does have it it does have vulnerabilities in the sense of QR codes. If you are taking in unsecured QR codes with your phone, it renders your entire phone. It could render your entire phone vulnerable and then make the signal vulnerable from your phone. But in terms of actually hacking the app, that's very difficult, if not outright impossible for most places, except maybe NSA and top security agencies. But if we are talking about top US officials, they should have not been taking any chances. Even if the app is recommended for civilian use, it probably would not be same level of encryption that is good for the top US security officials. Personally, I would not have risked it. But the problem is they didn't just use Signal, which they claimed that Biden used it as well. The Biden team claims they had installed it but never actually used it. But they used unsecured devices. They used personal phones. They added random, and hostile journalists to a chat group without ever checking who that
Right.
was. Then they lied about it multiple times, including under oath to Congress, which in itself is a crime. Had they just admitted to making a mistake and changing their practice, that would have been the end of the entire matter. But they doubled down and they claimed that they didn't do any of that. And then the situation got worse from internet that in addition to Signal, they were involved in many other unsecured cybersecurity and other habits, including watching gay porn online, including having unsecured Venmo lists. That's basically like a PayPal payment, online payment options to vendors. That included using Gmail for government communications, and that included leaking personal information by other means. And in Hexath's case, it also included bringing his wife to official private military functions where classified information was discussed. And of course, they used the worst part is that the Signal chats, they set up over 20 of those chats, not just one, and each of them included classified information, including names of undercover CIA operatives, Israeli assets in the case of that Houthi small group that also were leaked to journalists. And they were classified at the time this happened because they didn't know that they were discussing it with an outsider, and they didn't claim it was declassified until afterwards, which makes that whole claim completely irrelevant.
Right, Irina. Even a child is much more, aware about who they are adding to their group, or who is adding. But here it has gone much more beyond that. I wonder who is the admin of this particular Signals group, Irina.
So that particular admin was organized by Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, which I'm sure gives you a lot of faith in U.S. national security structure and makes everyone feel safe. Very, very safe immediately. I don't know who set up the other groups, but I do know that Steve Witkoff was in Russia when he was communicating with that particular group, which makes it very plausible that in addition to the Atlantic journalist who was actually very careful not to share classified information until it turned out that everybody else went around publicly talking about those points, regardless. Unlike that journalist, Russia was probably far less concerned about keeping U.S. classified information secure, and I'm sure that information got where it needed to be very quickly.
Absolutely. So let's move on from one scandal to another scandal, Qatar Gate in Israel. What's happening in this? While this, what's the long-term impact of this scandal? And amidst this, Netanyahu, he makes a controversial visit to Hungary, and Orban withdraws from ICC.
So the Qatargate scandal is actually not new, even though Netanyahu and his allies are trying to portray it as something that happened and broke unexpectedly and suddenly. It's not new in the sense that the people who were involved have been doing things like that for a very long time. Some of them have already been charged with other crimes unrelated to the story, making it far less surprising that they were involved in something of that scale. And as for Qatar, no one should be surprised that they're involved in something like that, because this tactic of what they were doing is identical to what they've already done in the United States and Europe. Which is to say, they pursued media campaigns by bribing high-level officials close to power, compromising them, and spreading propaganda against their rivals. To summarize, there is a long list of officials, journalists, and political operatives involved in the story in varying degrees. The full scale is not yet disclosed. It's still under investigation, and more people are being questioned and roped in various ways. But the three main suspects are political advisors from Netanyahu's office. Not all of them were privy to highly classified information, but all of them were in position to do damage as agents of influence, including during wartime. One of them is already, as I said, charged for allegedly leaking supposedly forged classified information to German media. Two of the three people allegedly worked with Qatar on their propaganda for their World Cup. And they continued doing so, whitewashing Qatar's image even after October 7th, when it was obvious that Qatar was involved. That's actually a major potential legal charge. And one of these guys is actually not in Israel. He's in Serbia advising the president there. And additional information is that supposedly at least one of these people was spreading anti-Egypt propaganda on behalf of Qatar, and that is causing major furor and reaction in Egypt. Not so much about Israel, but about Qatar, because they already had tense relations going back to the 2017 Gulf crisis that were hastily patched up by the outgoing Trump administration and incoming Biden administration, and essentially they resumed diplomatic, trade, and even media relations, but distrust remained there. And now some of the things that Qatar was allegedly promoting through these Israelis was that Egypt was on the verge of declaring war on Israel, that Egypt had secret links to Hamas and essentially was helping Hamas. The goal of all of this was to discredit Egypt, to cause tensions with the US and with Israel, and to get Egypt out from negotiations over the hostages and to secure the monopoly over the process for Doha. So, as you can imagine, there is a firestorm. All of this, Netanyahu, of course, is trying to pin it all on the outgoing Shin Bet chief, whom he accused of masterminding a plot to undercut his own authority in the middle of many other domestic political battles with the attorney general over his corruption cases and alleged fight against the deep state. But increasingly, it just doesn't seem plausible. There's just too many people involved. There's financial evidence that is being found and released, and there's also other allegations that are coming forth that are showcasing clear communication links between some of the actors in this drama and Qataris, and that includes an American Qatari lobbyist who admitted to paying off some of these people on Qatar's behalf.
Absolutely. There's so much to learn about all these things, about the games people play, games businesses play, games lobbyists play, and games politicians play. Be that as it may, let's look at the last topic of our day. What game is happening in terms of TikTok? Means another extension where is the Trump administration looking at it, playing a bargaining chip with China? How does it look like, Irene?
Well, here's the irony. Trump actually was on the verge of closing this deal. The reason it did not go through was because of the tariff policy. ByteDance, which was the parent company of TikTok, which was supposed to be in on the deal with the American buyers, and was supposed to retain partial control over the controversial algorithm that everybody's mad about. They pulled out because of the tariffs, and now the whole deal is off, and they have to look for other buyers. And so Trump extended the lifeline for another 75 days, essentially violating the congressional law. So we're in a place where it's extremely awkward. China, of course, is unlikely to get involved on anything unless it gets a tariff-related concession. They have the cards on this because they have that algorithm, they have the company, and now it's something that would not have been a major economic issue before the tariffs, had it been fully shut down and disclosed. Now may become yet another drop in the bucket of economic uncertainty, simply because now that's just another place where people will lose jobs. Now, again, I was personally in favor of shutting down TikTok quickly, and letting these people find jobs and influencers in American or other based companies, which would not have been a problem. But with the tariffs coming in, it's going to be in mass layoffs expected will affect every industry and sector and make it more difficult for anyone to find a job anywhere where they're remotely qualified. Do I think these influencers could fill in the 11 million unfilled highly technical jobs in the US? No, I do not. I do not think that TikTok influencers could become could become semiconductor engineers. Nor do I think that the fired cancer researchers can go and make widgets for factory transferred over from Vietnam. I don't think any of those things are going to be happening. I think whoever thinks that there's some level of interchangeability during a huge economic crisis is completely delusional.
Absolutely. But then you can't say anything because, especially when influencers are influencing a lot of things in policy making, a lot of these, influencers have to be taken in account. But I wonder for the general people, means they just don't know. It's a catch-22 position whether to keep TikTok, to invest in it, to work on it, for businesses also to invest in it or work in it, because everything is now, on a standstill on that front. Even if you have got a extension, there's a lot of uncertainty everywhere on this.
Absolutely. I think it makes it very difficult for the public to figure out what to do, whether even to take a vacation, how to manage their savings, how to manage their pensions. My general advice would be to reinvest in things that are not quickly affected by the course of the dollar, things like real estate and chattels, and more traditional things like gold. Unfortunately, it's a very old-fashioned way of dealing with economy. It's much less. It's difficult for various reasons. Also, because financially, with the interest rates, Federal Reserve interest rates, it's unpredictable in terms of securing mortgages and so forth. So even that is going to be difficult. But Yeah, I don't think the stock market is going to be stabilizing anytime soon.
Absolutely. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of The World According to Irina Tsukerman on the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much. This was great as usual.